Hi, hello. So once again, welcome to our webinar. So this is our fifth of the 7 series of remote teaching and learning. So I'm here again to introduce to you our resource person. So she is a full-time faculty member of the Faculty of Education, UP Open University, where she has handled courses in Associated Arts, Bachelor of Education Studies, and in the Diploma and Master of Arts in Language and Literacy Education programs. She currently serves as the program chair for LLE and the director of the Office of Academic Support and Instructional Services. She is one of the academic support units of the Open University. Is mandated to assist the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs in the planning and development of UPOU courses and their primary instructional materials. So with her academic discipline, focusing on language education and communication arts, her research interests and public service work include addressing issues under the effect in language learning, social media use in higher education, technology and language learning, intercultural language teaching and learning, among others. Her previous and current research engagements include the UPOU's research projects on teaching and learning strategies with tablet computers in selected national high schools and advancing equity and access to higher education through open and distance learning. So ladies and gentlemen, our viewers, so let's all welcome Assistant Professor Katrina Marcial. Ma'am.
Hello, good day to all the teachers and curriculum developers and even course writers, perhaps even parents out there who've been preoccupied with all the preparations for the next academic year, given this current health situation across the globe. My virtual background is in space, mainly because what we're experiencing now is really out of this world. But thank you for having me, for having us and listening to us from UP Open University and from the ICT Mindanao Cluster 1. You may have been bombarded with a series of webinars and information that are out there already, but we commend you for carrying on. I hope even during these trying times, no matter how challenging, we can still afford to see that tiny silver lining, that all these preparations, all these adjustments that we may have a chance or opportunity to improve on certain aspects of traditional instruction while strengthening those aspects that are good practices, but this time through the meaningful use of information and communication technologies. I'm going to share my screen now. So I'm going to ask the host to allow me to share my screen. Because the generic topic assigned to me is to talk about different formative and summative assessment mechanisms, which can be done remotely. Which in a sense, you are going to redesign your assessments. And in that case, well, what I'm going to share with you right now, you can consider them if they are appropriate, most suitable for your needs. I do not profess to contain all the answers, to have all the answers. In fact, I'm continually learning myself, but I do hope that the strategies, tips from credible institutions and research work and my colleagues' experiences, which I'm about to share, would help clarify what you must and what you can do as you prepare for the upcoming academic year. But let me begin with a few contexts and assumptions. First, assessment is not separate from the other aspects of your course plan. It's true during the face-to-face teaching, and it's still going to be true now, which is why we began this series of webinar series with the generic planning and re-evaluation of what we currently have. At least in the 4 previous webinars which we've conducted, most of you have been presented with basic considerations, challenges, directions during the remote teaching and learning, the transition, including online technologies, which you can explore, resource-based learning or meaningful use of resources, designing the overall learning experience in the previous webinars. And in relation to this point that assessment is not separated, Prof. Garcia's webinar emphasized that you develop a course plan. You can use this table presented or a variation of this. And some of the schools may have already been conducting series of workshops or review of the curriculum, no? And some of you may have conducted constructive realignment if needed, or you adopted backward design, no, in your review. But regardless of the context, you were reminded time and again, what do my students need to learn? In the previous webinar, Prof. Bandelaria asked you this question. And I'd like to build on that. The questions now concerning assessment naman would be to ask ourselves that given the current limitations as well as opportunities, what do my students need to learn and how are they going to show evidence of their outputs which demonstrate the knowledge, skills, and attitudes they have supposedly gained from next academic year's lessons. Likewise, how are my assessment tools related to the other aspects of teaching the subject or the course and or implementing the curriculum? In a presentation on assessment in the sciences conducted by Assistant Professor Rivera, a colleague from the Faculty of Education for Pampanga State Agricultural University, she included these generic steps regarding planning for assessment. How are we going to conduct the assessment? So of course, you go back to the goal manual, go back to your learning objective set, you gather information, and then you try to plan for the action. And these generic steps, hindi naman po yan mababago. But now I guess the question is, what is acceptable given the current situation? How can we balance these factors which may affect the teaching and learning experience, especially with regard to assessment? In the same manner, kasi one way to balance is perhaps a reclassification of your assessment tools, no? If in the planning of your lessons or content, you are encouraged to ask yourselves what are the essential topics, useful topics lang or interesting topics lang. In the same manner, parang if in the planning of your content or your topics, Bates and Poole recommended this. You classify them into essential, useful, and interesting. In the same manner, classify your assessments too. Later on, I'll talk about this formative, summative assessments, the assessment purposes, classification of those assessments as low stakes or high stakes assessment. So that's for the first assumption. And the second assumption here for this presentation is that there have been systems in place and preparations done about assessment at the various levels within your institution. Preparations done or being done. You will discover, if you haven't yet, that there are aspects of assessment which should be set up or designed at the levels, different levels within your institution. Beyond the course or beyond the subject matter, especially if we are to talk about the various types of assessments. No? For example, there are certain support services which should be put in place for your students and even for you as teachers, ideally, especially for high stakes assessment. Next assumption. It is a given that the assessment tool you may need to redesign is highly dependent on the discipline, your area, particularly the expected learning outcomes from the subjects or courses you will teach. We recognize that there are assessment needs or requirements that are specific to your fields of study or disciplines kasi. But as a strategy, perhaps, this should not stop you from trying to integrate whatever aspects of learning competencies na present from one area to another, which means collaboration among teachers may be the key to make the redesigning of assessments easier. Kasi doing so will help your students and yourself as teachers without sacrificing the learning competencies you deem essential. For example, excuse me. Okay, given this senior high curriculum, the senior high curriculum with core courses on earth and life science, and then reading and writing skills on the other hand. In the earth and life science, for the first quarter, the sample learning competencies are, so you state the different hypotheses, explaining the origin of the universe. You describe the different hypotheses, explaining the origin of the solar system, and then explain current advancement or information on the solar system. That's for earth and life science. On the other hand, another core course, this time reading and writing skills. One topic has this set of learning competencies. First is you distinguish between and among techniques in selecting and organizing information through brainstorming, graphic organizer, topic outline, sentence outline. And then another learning competency is for students to distinguish between and among patterns of development in writing across disciplines through narration, description, definition, exemplification or classification, comparison and contrast, cause and effect, problem, solution, and persuasion. Given these two sets, no, and assuming you've provided content about, for Earth and Life Science, about the origin of the universe and the solar system through articles you found online, PowerPoint presentation you prepared yourself, link to an open educational resource in video format, perhaps a short video clip or video lecture. And then also you've, on the other hand, for reading and writing skills naman, you've presented the different techniques for organizing information. Now, how will you be able to integrate as a strategy? One set of assessment, simple assessment, could be, first you ask the students to organize all the pieces of information provided, or they've gathered if you ask them to do a quick research then, to summarize the hypothesis surrounding the origin of the universe. And how are they going to organize it? Through a graphic organizer. So on one end, you're able to address or help develop that learning competency in terms of distinguishing the different techniques in selecting and organizing information for reading and writing skills. And on the other hand, you're able also to address the learning competency for, or help hone the learning competency for earth and life science course. Another assessment, although of course formative assessment yung binabanggit ko, no? You present them with paragraphs or excerpts about the origin of the solar system and the subsequent developments in related studies. Then, ask them to classify these excerpts, yung ibinigay niyo pong paragraph, according to patterns of development. Or you ask them to demonstrate the summary using topic outline. So again, you'll be able to help address or help hone the competencies for both courses through those assessment tools. And with all these working assumptions, so those three are the assumptions and context for this presentation, still the question lingers siguro. Why do we assess, or why should we still assess given the shift in the mode of delivery that we'll have? Perhaps the easy and immediate answer if with you as teachers is that, of course, we want to be able to have the outputs that we need to judge the students' achievements. However, we should go beyond this then. So, first, that's a given na nga through this learning cycle. And ideally, kasi if we're guided with the OBE framework, we figure out what learners should get out of the instruction, determine how we as teachers will know if they were successful, and then decide what they should do to get to that point. You know? That set of activities which the student should do to reach the desired success, it's basically reflected po in our assessment methods, our assessment activities that we design. So consistent yun dun sa learning cycle presented dun sa McGill University. No? Assessment is a critical component. In the example from the previous slide, you want to have that evidence, sure, that to declare that the student has indeed acquired these competencies. The question na lang is how right now. I'll skip reviewing the basic principles and standards of assessments, you know, the validity, reliability of your assessment tools or test items, but I'll focus on one way to view types of assessment as our anchor, and that is based on purpose, so assessment purpose. In the resource Rethinking Classroom Assessment with Purpose in Mind, there are 3 types of assessment. You have assessment for learning, and then of learning, and as learning. Depending on the kind of assessment that you will do, here are the reasons for the assessment. The focus of the for assessment would be to enable you to determine the next steps so that they'll be able to advance. You know? And then the next, then of, this is, I guess, what's familiar for all of the teachers out there, because we want to be able to certify or inform others of the proficiency of the students. And then we have the assessment as learning, mainly because we want to guide and provide opportunities for each student to monitor themselves and critically reflect on their learning, and they themselves identify the next steps. Sometimes, because of various factors within and internal and even outside the control of the teachers, we tend to focus on assessment of learning. And that's not necessarily a bad thing po, because that's a requirement din kasi talaga. But given our current situation, maybe we need to ask ourselves then, towards an improved teaching and learning environment, should we just focus on assessment of learning on this purpose? Especially challenging times din, baka mas strategic and sustainable if, at least if only for the first few weeks of your semester or your quarter, dun muna tayo sa assessment for learning and as learning as a combination. No? But let's think about that as an option, as a direction. To expound on the view of assessment in terms of purpose, and then the assessment for as of learning. Let's go back to what formative assessments and summative assessments as types of assessments are. First, we have formative assessments. Sometimes the formative assessments are classified as assessment for learning. According to Black and William, who were among the first to formulate the formal definition of formative assessment, these are all activities undertaken by teachers and or by their students which provide information to be used as feedback to modify the teaching learning activities in which they are engaged. Yale University added that these are your tools that identify misconceptions, struggles, and learning gaps along the way and assess how to close those gaps. These can include students assessing themselves, the peers assessing each other, even the instructor through writing, quizzes, conversations, and a whole lot more of assessment activities. Our challenge now, if this is a definition of formative assessment, the challenge now is the addressing of how to close that gap, identified. Meanwhile, on the other hand, for summative assessments, these sum up what a learner has achieved at the end of a period relative to the learning aims and the relevant national standards. Typically, these are what we're familiar with. Perhaps there's scored and graded long exams, assignments, even performance and projects. Pero let's take note, the time po, the period of time may vary. There may be summative assessment at the end of a major topic, or what we classify sometimes as a module. There may be summative assessments at the end of a term or half midterm, at the end of a specific grading period, quarter. And this is where your planning becomes crucial. But there's this important note, no? According to the principles of good practice for assessing student learning. It says, the principles say that assessment works best when it's ongoing, not episodic, when assessment reflects an understanding of learning as multidimensional, integrated, and revealed in performance over time. Which is really why baka nga po it's going to be a more strategic direction if we are to focus at least initially lang muna for dun sa mga formative assessments for learning, and then include that assessment as learning aspect. Another way to look at the assessment types then is to classify them into traditional and alternative assessments. Although traditional and alternative assessment should not be just either or, no, where you choose one over the other. Ideally, there's this. It's a given that we try for them to complement each other and supplement one another. Traditional assessments, as you know, they're the more conventional ones. They're your paper and pen tests used to measure what students know. Typically, what we design, the assessment tool that we design is a test with MCQs or multiple choice questions, true or false, short answer test types. What else? Sometimes may ilan na lalagyan natin yun ng essay. Alternative assessments, on the other hand, these are your various methods which focus on demonstration and application of knowledge and skills. Examples would be your performance assessment or performance-based assessment, portfolio assessment in the form of collaborative writing assignments, video presentation, reflection paper or observation notes, short surveys, even field reports, lab reports, any assessment activities which may maximize the use of self and peer assessments as well. Another way to classify it is you ask yourself how much of the assessment will be high stakes and how much will be low stakes. High stakes assessments are linked to the significant major decisions about the student's progression, certification of knowledge, skills, or abilities. Low stakes assessment naman, on the other hand, do not heavily impact students' final grades or other educational outcomes, but may provide constant checkpoints for learners. Although, kahit low stakes yan, pwede naman po yan na graded or recorded. It's just that it will just take a small portion of the overall grade of the student if you are grading. Now, the question now is, kung those are just refresher po, no, on our definition and the principles that we are working on, is what are the different forms of formative and summative assessments that we can choose from as we redesign our own? Kasi we're not going to start from scratch. Kaya lang, maybe we need additional guidance. Now, Dustin Summy from the University of Central Arkansas provided the summary of common formative and summative assessments, depending on which of Bloom's taxonomy of learning objectives you intend to target. Of course, this is just one recommendation po, no, on how you can choose which assessment tool you will redesign or develop depending on the curriculum. So for example here, if you can see, it's the evaluating stage. If you want to target that, you can do, for a formative assessment, you can just ask them for a short 1-minute summary and reflection activity. The lab reports, although it depends kasi on the design, no, of your assessment, simulations and case studies. But also for summative assessment, even for using multiple choice and short answer exams, you can use that as a summative assessment targeting the evaluating stage, and all these. So I will just give to you for a few seconds siguro to take a peek at the different assessment forms and tools that you can use depending on the learning objectives. But you can also go back to the learning activities initially presented by Dean Garcia and Chancellor Bandelaria in the previous webinar sessions. No? Depending on the interaction you wish to foster, various types of activities were presented by Dr. Garcia's webinar, while the Chancellor recently presented some learner-centered instructional methods. Granted, they're really meant for delivering your topic for the instructional aspect of your teaching, but you can take a look at those and you can use some of them, really, those activities and methods as assessments, especially if for formative purpose. Some of them even for summative. So you go back. But here are a few of the assessment tools typically used in open and distance e-learning, but you may consider them in your redesign for remote teaching and learning mode. No? I present a few reminders and strategies, low to no bandwidth alternatives, and a few common online tools or apps which you can explore. First is the online quiz. So what you can do is from your traditional objective-based pen and paper tests, take a look at those items and see which can be converted into an online quiz. You can also use discussion forums pero yung highlight for asynchronous discussions. And then of course, hindi naman mawawala the academic paper, which can come in various formats or forms: case study, your research report, your reaction or critique paper, even lab reports. Then you have the e-journals or reflective blogs, presentations, whether recorded or live demonstrations. You have your web conferencing sessions for synchronous performance assessment, especially your multi-part course projects and e-portfolios. This items C to H, they can serve as products of both performance and portfolio assessments, depending on your design. And there are numerous apps out there already. Plethora of recommended lists have also been available online. I leave you to explore them when it's convenient for you to see which are most suitable for your context. But I'll as mentioned, I will cite a few here. But whatever final app you will explore, just limit to those you feel you really need for administering your assessments, and be considerate of the case of your learners. Because aside from current resources, there's also that concern on one's learning curve. The students have a relatively short period, kasi just like you, they have a short period to learn all these online tools, if ever. But let's dig in for online quiz. A few reminders. To start with, you have to review the basic principles of test construction and the strategies for designing effective tests. Ensure that these are observed regardless of the delivery format. What are those strategies and what are those principles? No? Well, first you make sure that there are no, as an example, ensure that there are no unintended clues in the items. Watch out for biases, gender and race bias. Of course, you have to ensure that there is just one correct answer. You can, because you're going to place the quiz online, ensure that the answer cannot be easily searched through Google. So yung mga ganyan na strategies, and you may also want to consider pala allowing multiple attempts or tries. No? Kasi because it's an online quiz, and if you are going to use it as a formative assessment anyway, it's important that the students themselves will be able to discover through their multiple attempts the answers to your items. You may need also to create multiple versions of the test, especially if you are going to make them available online. But another reminder, note that most of the time, multiple choice questions, true or false, short answer tests, they typically target lower order thinking skills, the remembering and understanding levels. Although, there's this important note as well. When effectively designed, you can target other levels. You saw from Sami's illustration, di ba? Pwede siya up to the higher order thinking skills. But the main point is that make sure that tools you use fit your purpose. So for example, if mostly you make use naman of online quiz for measuring content knowledge. So in this case, what are the tools that you can explore? So the simpler tools would be just the simple Q&A through text, through chat. Although in some cases, you may still consider doing pen and paper test and then just distribute. Because the whole point of that test or that quiz, if ever, would be through formative, would be as a formative assessment anyway. But if you and your students can afford to explore other tools that are out there, and you have a learning management system, you can explore using Moodle, the quiz feature in Moodle. There is the option to make Google Forms a quiz. Edmodo also has a quiz feature, among others. And then if you want to explore other apps naman and software, there's Kahoot. It's a game-based classroom response system. Maybe some of you have already been using that. Teachers can create quizzes there using internet content. And then you have Quizlet. You can create quiz as well, and then flashcards. You may also check Seesaw. For me, akala ko yun lang yung old school na paglalaro sa playground. But there's this app called Seesaw where you can communicate with parents. Again, of course, if you can afford the resource, and the parents can too. And also Socrative, there are exercises and games that engage students there. So that's for online quiz. How about naman for discussion forum as an assessment? What are the reminders? First, you have to be comprehensive in your set of instructions for a specific forum thread. Be clear in the kind of forum questions you will ask, and even in your discussion protocol. How should the students post and share? What are the minimum expectations from them anyway? Of course, the learning outcomes for each topic should be clear, should be clarified. The time allotment for the discussion, kasi nga asynchronous discussion tayo, and it's not going to be fair because it's asynchronous. It's not going to be fair to expect them to participate at a specific time zone even. So you have to clarify that. Okay, this discussion forum will be open for the next 2 weeks. Because these are the these are the discussion protocols. These are the criteria for assessing your participation in this discussion. Yung mga ganyan po. Another reminder would be you need to take note of the varying roles you can assume for every discussion forum. Because discussion forums or discussion boards can be used as, on one hand, simple learning activities. But at the same time, they can be used as assessment tool also. But you need to decide how involved will you be in the forum thread. Will you use that as a venue for peer discussions, for example, and you just monitor the discussion? Will you take a more active, hands-on role in facilitating the discussions there? But in any case, here are the tools that you can explore. The simpler ones would be just email threads, or that the forum and chat group chat feature of your social media group pages. You may also explore collaborative documents. For example, yung sa shared Google Doc lang, tapos ilagay, you post a question there, and tapos the students will just write or include their thoughts on the matter. There is also that still version of this assessment tool, discussion forum as an assessment tool, where you ask your students to contribute to a graffiti wall or collage of their inputs, their thoughts. Well, of course, you're going to go traditional here, no? Na you'll ask them just to write on a piece of paper or something and then put it kung saan man. If you have arrangement with your LGU, so doon, collect lang yung posts nila, and then you as teacher will collect everything and make a collage out of it. Yung mga ganyan ba? The whole point naman, I mean, regardless of whatever of the form of this discussion forum, the whole point is that they're able to contribute their thoughts, share their thoughts on whatever issue or topic that you will post. No? If you have a learning management system, you can explore the discussion forum or discussion board, post discussion board questions for Moodle, Google Classroom, and Edito. If you can afford to explore online apps or software, there's also these sets. At least, especially for initial brainstorming and or a venue rin, a page where students can post their thoughts or sometimes even outputs nga po. Padlet, this one, the number 3 app, essentially provides a blank canvas for students to design or create collaborative projects even. Now, you can start it off with just posting a simple discussion topic. Then they'll just post their thoughts there. Alternatives would be these, the MyBB, Now Comment. MyBB is an open source forum software. You can set up a message boards, enable registration of students. Tapos you can moderate as well. Now Comment naman, it's a discussion about online documents. I mean, it allows you to do that. Kialo, it's for argument mapping and debate, usually. Now, another assessment form or tool that you can use is for academic papers and e-journals or reflective blogs naman as assessment. One strategy would be to design application assignments, authentic assessments, and performance-based assessments, and have them submit part of whatever output that you will ask them as an academic paper. Although side note lang tayo ng konti because I mentioned there a few key phrases. Performance assessment, what is this? These are assessments where learners are required to demonstrate knowledge, skills, and competencies by performing a task or producing an output. While authentic assessment, on the other hand, it's a form of assessment in which students are asked to perform real world tasks and demonstrate meaningful application of essential knowledge and skills. So yung context niya talaga ay the things that can be done or can be applied, can be used in the real world setting. There are a group of assessment experts which view performance and performance-based assessments and authentic assessments synonymously. Pero there are also those who distinctly define authentic assessments as performance assessments, sure, but they have to be in the real world setting, and they have to be authentic tasks or contexts. Uh, but to expound on performance assessment, typically in this kind of assessment, we provide the students with the tasks, and then we pose questions or present the problem. Then we ask them to conduct research beyond the content which we've already given, which we've already provided them. And then ask them to draw on previously learned knowledge, synthesize findings, and create the output or product or perform the task. The book titled Understanding by Design by Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe, they focus on the mechanics, designing the mechanics for assessment, performance assessment. And they propose that we start with grasps when we design an assessment task under performance assessment. What do we mean by grasps? GRASP is an acronym for goal, which states the problem or challenge to be resolved, the role, in which you should explain who the students are in the scenario, in the situation that you will give them, and what are you going to ask of them. A is for audience, in which you will clarify who the students are solving the problem for, who they need to convince, for example, the recipient. Hindi lang to, ideally, the audience is not just limited to the teacher, just one teacher. No, pwedeng the audience would be the peers themselves, or even, kasi nga po, remote teaching and learning tayo, even in the community and or within the family. S is for situation. It provides the context of the situation and additional factors that could affect the, the, the task and the problem. P is for product, performance, and purpose. You explain the product and or performance that you are going to expect from the students to do or create. And then S is for your rubrics, your standards and criteria for success. In the webinar by Assistant Prof. Rivera, she included this template by McTighe and Wiggins regarding how one can construct the assessment task, for performance assessment. Maybe you can explore using this. It's a template already, still with under grasp. So, copy nyo lang yan. Your goal is to, if you are going to create the mechanics or the instructions for your performance assessment, that's how you're going to provide it to your students. Your goal is to blank, design whatever, create whatever, recreate whatever you are or your job is. So imagine that you are like this or like so, or assume this role. So ganyan lang po yung grasp as a template for construction. But side note lang yun, going back to academic paper and e-journals or reflective blogs as assessment. Given the current situation, let's avoid requiring the students to do and submit the paper in one sitting. Wag naman natin gawing isang bagsakan lang nila na ipapasa yung mga requirement po, no? Unless we're talking about supposedly mature adult learners already. Especially if we're going to use this academic paper as one summative assessment to end a quarter, halimbawa. Instead, you may ask them to report their progress on a regular basis before asking for the completed paper. You can also, what you can do too is to build on the work gradually by breaking a potential summative assessment into shorter formative chunks. So you try to link learning activities to the assessment tasks. That's one strategy in building the work. One example would be this, one example of linked activities and assessment is this practice by Assistant Prof. Reyes, another colleague at the Faculty of Education. This is what she did. She gave this is her input, she gave this resource where she asked the students to view this video with 4 experiments. So explore the resource first. And then she provided this follow-up activity. Now, there are 4 assessments in this video, and then you record your observations through using a worksheet. She provided a worksheet. And then after that, the idea was for the student to build on this worksheet. That's where the students can then write a paper about it, about the whole set of activities. That paper can then serve as an assessment tool. So ganun po that's one strategy of linking. Another strategy is to explore how you may integrate topics within the curriculum. In my earlier example, dun sa reading and writing skills and earth and life science. Ganito rin. Now this time let's take a look at physical education and health, and then understanding culture and society and politics as examples. These are also core courses for subjects in the senior high curriculum. So on one end, you have this set of learning competencies from the first quarter of physical ed and health under the topic exercise for fitness. That topic, exercise for fitness, it covers aerobic activities and muscle and bone strengthening activities. So these are the competencies. You would want your students to be able to distinguish aerobic from muscle and bone strengthening activities. You would want them to relate behaviors to health risks. You want them to recognize the role, to be able to recognize the role of physical activity assessments in managing stress. On the other hand, for understanding culture and society and politics subject, you have this one sample competency. You would want your students to articulate observations on human cultural variation, social differences, social change, and political identities. Now, what could serve as your set of assessment activities or tools for this, no? I may not be that familiar with proper muscle and bone strengthening activities anymore, but one short integrated formative assessment could be, first, you ask the students to conduct an informal observation, take note of the kinds of physical activities of their family members, and even their neighbors, if they can view naman their neighbors from their end. Tapos you provide guide rin dito sa informal observation na to. Yung mga kuya at ate nyo ba ay mahilig umakyat sa puno, mahilig mag-akyat baba sa hagdan, mag-sit-ups, magbuhat ng isang sakong bigas, and so on and so forth. Meron ba sa inyo na mahilig mag-zumba? Or baka ballroom dancing pa yung pastime na yan? Or puro tablet na ba? Puro nasa harap na lang ba ng computers? So yung ganun na example ng guide. And then after that, you ask them to write observation notes to be shared with the rest of the class through our discussion forum activity. Or you just select for them to interact or get in touch with a group or a peer, a partner. Then from here, they can compare notes and conduct further research. They can further interview or research online for other resources about what they've observed ng mga activities and so on and so forth. After that, then you can ask them to write a short essay. Distinguishing the activities and describing the similarities and differences in behavior among each other, yung mga findings nila. Of course, guided by whatever rubric for the topic that you will ask them to do, no? Pero, another add-on there is you may also ask them to have that reflective component. You allow them to reflect on their learning, their discoveries, the meaning it has for their lives. Through what? You ask them to keep journals where they can reflect, they can log their reflection of their progress and then growth. So yan yung one example of integrating your competencies or the curriculum. But tapos turning them into an academic paper and or journals and blogs. Here are the tools which you can explore. Of course, you can have still ask them to submit it as an email attachment, or you can open a forum or chat sa kahit social media pages. Again, collaborative documents, or kahit pen and paper, short essay pa lang yan, na ask them to submit a hard copy of the written work. Especially since in stages nyo naman ia-ask, based on my example, no? In stages nyo naman ia-ask yung activities, mga assessment activities for them. But also, if you have a learning management system, you can explore the features there, the submission bins. Moodle, Google Classroom, and Edmodo, they have bins there. If you can explore online apps or software out there, you have your blog sites. So you can ask them to put their entries there. These are just the top 3, I guess, that at least I'm familiar with: Wix, Google Sites, and WordPress. That's for academic paper, journals, and reflective blogs as assessment. Now for your presentations, demonstrations, and web conferences, primarily for synchronous performance as assessment po, no? I guess the reminder there would be you clarify the session protocol and provide a mock session. If you've noticed, the ICT Mindanao Cluster 1, they have the etiquette, diba? The virtual etiquette. So in the same manner, you also provide your students ahead of time the expectations during the synchronous session. And then provide a mock session. Kasi you will never know if hindi kaya ng internet connection, and or there are technical aspects of navigating the video conference tool na they might have difficulty with. Of course, you need to assist them with that, and the mock session will help. But nevertheless, these are the simpler tools that you can use. You can explore na lang asking them to record record themselves doing the demo, and or a documentation of the whole process. Aside from the output itself, baka mas importante pala, of course, given your objectives, no? Baka mas importante yung documentation where they can just provide the narrative of it, the experience, and then photo documentation. However, I recognize that the uploading and downloading may still complicate the task. But still, for those who can explore ito namang mga online tools, the video conferencing tools, you kindly go back to Dr. Ria's webinar on technologies kasi she presented a few. And then also, you also have narrated PowerPoints, screencasting apps, for example, Screencast-O-Matic, which you can explore or have your students explore. And then last set, you have multi-part course projects and e-portfolios as assessment. Again, consider splitting assessments. In the previous webinar, Prof. Bandalaria mentioned microlearning. So it's a strategy rin na we try to split our assessments. Because, isipin na lang po natin, no? If students are required to complete multiple performance tasks or kahit hindi performance assessment yan, multiple formative, summative assessments across multiple disciplines or classes or subjects, that can create additional stress, and that crucial po yun for the wellness of our students. But while pwede naman, posible naman na we explore integrating whatever we can. Also, another strategy would be you explore the use of self-assessments and peer assessments then in your assessment activities. It gives another layer or sense of purpose and being responsible for one's own learning. So, in your course projects and your portfolios, mas pwede nyo rin po yan kasing magawa. These projects also and these portfolios, they can be really the end product of all earlier formative assessments kasi that you will ask your students to do. So really parang compilation lang siya, except that's just one aspect of it, a compilation of outputs plus there's, and then a narration of process if ever. Then there's that component of reflection, as well as assessment from peers. But in terms of the tools which could help you do that, the assessment, you can have, again, documentation, photos, narrative, plus that reflection component to be submitted as email attachment, and or you can simply ask them to have or to use collaborative documents, or kahit pa nga ask them to submit a hard copy of a written work. Parang scrapbook o yung magiging dating. Pero hindi siya isang in one sitting. They would not do it in one sitting. Diba? Across one quarter, ito yung mga inask nyo sa kanila ng formative assessments leading to this final summative output. And ganun, that's the idea. For those who can be able to explore yung mga online na apps and tools natin, again, the blog sites. And you can also explore the use of Canva and Storyboard that. These are apps mainly for preparing more visually engaging output, no, mga infographics, and even presentations. Storyboard that, it's for storyboard. So parang meron din atang feature yan na comics. I'm yet to try the comics part. So that's it for the set of assessment tools. To end this session, I would want you to do a self-reflection. Not one, I will request that you do a self-reflection. Out of the most common assessments you've used in one subject or course that you typically handle and will be asked to teach next academic year, which do you think can be easily, quote unquote, easily adopted for remote teaching and learning? Which will be the most challenging and how so? But despite the challenges, what opportunities have you and your school been exploring? How can you and your colleagues cope, but as well as contribute? So, iwan ko po sa inyo yung mga reflection questions na yan. I'm sure you have answers for all of them already, or you've asked them those questions way before, since the lockdown pa siguro. But I'd just like you to reflect on this one. Here are the references that I used for this morning's webinar. And you may say, send emails to Oasis Inquiries if you have questions or further clarifications, and check UPOU networks for other relevant materials, not just about assessment, no, for the various aspects of open and distance learning and online teaching and learning to help you in your preparation and your redesign. I cannot give you a formula. No, I cannot give you a formula or recipe for success in redesigning your formative and summative assessments, but the ones that I presented, those are additional considerations which may help you. And I guess one additional point to ponder, given the highly challenging nature of this next few months, consider working with a colleague, siguro, or a team that you trust if you haven't done so yet. And that's it for me. Thank you. Okay, for lab activities, how can we make sure that these alternative assessments for lab activities will still guarantee that the students gain the skills and knowledge required for the course, especially if it's a board exam course? This is a very significant, important question po, and raised talaga din siya for those in the sciences. There are a few kasi that you can ask the students to conduct, sure, at home. Pero of course, you have to have a clear set of protocols for that, no? And baka nga, depende rin kasi yun dun sa level ng learners. But for those that you really can't, kasi it will be dangerous and may sarili siyang set ng protocols. That's why yung alternative ay you provide first yung mga hindi pa hands-on. Kaya po mas ang tutok natin yung assessment for learning, formative assessments muna. Kasi, and at the same time, reclassifying nga din how significant, how important itong assessment activity na to versus itong another set of assessment activity. Tapos dun sa mga essential talaga, dahil nga crucial na ma-develop nila itong mga skills for a board exam, baka pag medyo maluwag-luwag na po yung situation natin sa ngayon. But then again, even if that happens, meron pa rin yung certain set of rules, diba? Na may social distancing and all that. Or limited number of students and teachers lang pwede at a specific session. Pero the whole point is, while we're waiting for that, we're trying to, or we'll be able to prepare the students, ask them to do formative activities, to prepare them for that and assessment, summative assessment. How do we know that our students are not cheating in remote teaching? Okay, this is another set. No? And I mentioned this in UPOU's first series of webinar last March. Regardless of the context, whether it's in the residential or face-to-face setting, or remote teaching, or open and distance e-learning setting, those students inclined to cheat will find ways to do so. But I'd like to think that those students who genuinely really like to learn from the teachers, from the content, and from each other, would not do so, regardless kung ano yung setting natin. And at the same time, that is why it's crucial nga po na you rethink your assessments, your assessment activities in such a way na they're just formative chunks and linked siya. For example, on one hand, you don't ask them to just submit one major paper at once, na there is a risk for them to just copy and paste from articles they found online. Diba? What you would want to do is you make use of discussion forums, or kung individual yan, individual na submission pero short essays or paragraphs even, so that you will have an idea regarding his or her writing style, for example. So that's one strategy in which you can do na after, pag na-receive mo na yung major paper, wait, nag-iba ang style of writing niya. And then of course, you have a software for checking kung plagiarized work ba yung paper. So but the idea is you provide linked activities po kasi, nag-build on. So that's one strategy to prevent teaching. And then for online tests, yun nga po, you go back to test construction and principles of test construction, effective test construction, and strategies to reduce cheating, which is, yung may mga nabanggit ko ako kanina na wag the way you would construct your test, hindi siya reading, merong mga clues, and so on and so forth. Medyo detailed yan. Isang mahabang discussion rin po yan in terms of strategies. No? But again, you go back. What is this assessment for in the first place? If we're talking here about the cheating, if we are talking about a summative test, no? So those are the things that you can do. Yung iba, if the resources will allow, nag-explore sila ng online proctoring services. Next question. Oh, I forgot to mention your names. I'm so sorry. This one's anonymous attendee. How is peer assessment done? It depends on the kind of assessment mo that you will do, no? Pero peer assessment, of course, you'll have in whatever assessment tool that you will ask the students to do, whatever assessments. May component lang siya dun sa guidance nyo, sa mechanics mo, na you will ask other students to take a look at this work and then comment and so on and so forth. But that comment is structured. You will guide the learners how to do the assessment. And it's not really more of parang be a factor in the major grade, more of on the side of the learner receiving the assessment, more of to have this additional perspective na, okay, ganito pala nakita nung kaklase ko yung itong output na to. These are the points for improvement and so on and so forth. On the part naman of the student na doing the assessment, you are training them to take a look at something critically. Kaya po yung assessment guide the peer assessment guide that you will ask them to do ay, of course, has to be directed as well. Has to be structured as well, structured well. In terms of submission, depende rin po yan. Kung paper yun, edi meron po kasi mga learning management systems na pwede yung as a workshop activity na nakikita nung isang student yung output ng isa pang student and he or she can comment or assess. And or pwede nga yung sa Google Docs lang. Or if for non-online, kung hindi kaya ng online, ang mangyayari po dyan, medyo matagal lang. Kasi we will rely on submissions na old school, quote-unquote, traditional na literal na pen and paper, tapos i-distribute siya for assessment pa ng iba. Yun. Does remote teaching recommend for assessing lower order thinking skills more than HOTS, than higher order? Actually, hindi po. Ako personally, it's not more of a recommendation na sa lower order lang muna tayo. In fact, mas yun pa nga yung, at least for online test, halimbawa, mas yun yung baka prone pa dun sa temptation to cheat, no? It depends kasi po on how you will design your assessment or redesign your assessment activity. Pwede po kasing mag-umpisa ka, sure, lower order yung, mag-umpisa ka isang topic lang yung focus mo, no? But you will start with targeting lower order thinking skills through online test or through open discussion forum. Pero from their participation there, from the students' participation, from their forum entries, magbi-build yon into a paper nga or a journal entry or combination. Tapos, pero may in your assessment guide for them, mas yung HOTS na yung target natin. Tapos from that academic paper, pwede pang manganak yan maging certain projects. So yun.
Thank you for joining us. We are DICT MC1 World Champion at World Summit on Information Society Prizes 2020 by International Telecommunications Union we wish you a safe and blessed week. Please stay negative. Bye po!